Does gear really matter that much in photography? This is a question that I've heard for so many times for as long as I've been learning to become a photographer. And this is a debate that has never ended ever since someone asked it for the first time. And I think the reason why it's a never ending debate and it's going to continue to be a never ending debate is because it's too vague of a question. However, I do think that talking about it extensively is going to bring a lot of insight to the table, which is why in this video, I want to talk specifically about that. Now, before anything else, welcome back to the channel. If you're watching for the first time, my name is Nico Valenzuela. I am a landscape and architectural photographer. And honestly, for the past couple of months, or maybe even half a year, I've been doing so many gear reviews. And I thought that this topic would be a great break from all the tripod and all the other accessory reviews that I've been doing on a monthly or even weekly basis. Does gear really matter? More specifically, does good gear, does more advanced gear, does more expensive gear really matter that much? Again, as I said, this is going to continue to be a never-ending debate. This is going to be a topic that the next generation, the next 10 generations will be talking about. Unless, of course, there's really something groundbreaking that changes technology when it comes to cameras and how photographers do photography. But in general, I think that this is going to be a question that will be asked, a debate that will be talked about for years on, for decades on. This is something valid, and this is something that can be very insightful. This is something that all of us can learn from if we actually talked about it in proper depth. Now, in this corner, we have the people that say no, gear does not matter. These are the people who say that it's in the user and not in the camera. These are the people who say that it's in the archer and not the bow and arrow. I think if we're going to look at it objectively, the main point of this side is that what matters more is how good you are as a photographer, regardless of what you are shooting with. And I think that is even more so valid right now in this day and age wherein even smartphones have very powerful cameras. So I do think that side, the no side, is very much valid. However, in the other corner, we have the people who say yes, that gear helps you become a better photographer, that good gear can help you achieve better things. And in the same way, I think it is also a valid point. Obviously, these are the people who are taking a lot of the technicalities of photography into consideration. Now, again, the reason why this discussion is never going to end is simply because the question is way too vague. It's too vague because it generalizes photography and photographers way too much. It's too vague because it doesn't really narrow down into certain contexts. So if we have a question that is that vague with so many possibilities, with so many possible scenarios, then both sides can actually come up with subcontexts within them that will make it favorable for what they're trying to point out. But with the fact that this is a vague question, it doesn't automatically mean that it is a pointless question. Because again, there's so much to talk about when it comes to that. And of course, I do have my personal opinion about this topic. But in the interest of being neutral, let's try and see what both sides mean. So with that being said, instead of making this a yes or no question, let's make it a question about contexts. When does gear not matter? Now, believe me, regardless of how many times I do gear reviews, how many cameras, how many lenses I review in a particular year, my answer is always that you can do photography with any camera. Anything with a camera, you can do photography with it. More importantly, you can learn photography with it. With that said, I think the most important answer to this first question is that gear doesn't matter when you're still starting out. Gear doesn't matter when you're still learning. When you're still learning, you're trying to explore so many different kinds of photography. When I was starting out, I borrowed the camera from a good friend and I would bring it everywhere and I would photograph anything that I could, anything that made me curious. And I think part of what has led me to become a photographer for 15 years now is the fact that I got way too curious and the fact that I basically learned because of that curiosity. When I was starting out, I was in my senior year in high school. I borrowed a friend's camera, which was an entry-level DSLR. And when I didn't have that, I would have my mom's point-and-shoot camera. It's one of those little Sony CyberShot cameras that were shaped like soap, basically. And to say the least, none of those cameras were high-end at the time. The technology that we had back then would be nothing compared to the technology that we have in the cameras now. It does have its own merit. But to be completely honest, no matter how grateful I am for the opportunity to be starting out with those two cameras available back then, I don't think I would attribute who I am as a photographer. I don't think I would credit the cameras per se to be the reason why I became a photographer later on. Those cameras were very helpful in the sense that they were available when I was starting out. But those two cameras, and not even the cameras that I had after those, the first DSLR I bought, the second DSLR I bought, none of them played a role into me becoming a landscape photographer. None of them played a role into me becoming an architectural photographer professionally. None of them played a role in me being a content creator, not a role in me being a photography writer and whatever else. But they played a huge role in me learning photography. And I think that on its own proves the point that gear doesn't matter when you're starting out because all you need is a camera that works. Now, another scenario, and I think we're moving within a spectrum here. Another scenario is when everything, or at least most of the things around, are fairly controlled. You're in a controlled environment, you have control of the lights, there is no scarcity of light, and you have control of your subject, meaning that it's not something moving erratically or moving way too fast. Obviously, if that's the case, if there are limitations with the camera that you're using, then you can, of course, compensate with, say, the lighting. You can move a light, you can make it brighter, you can make it darker, and you can use reflectors, modifiers, or anything else. At the same time, of course, if we're talking about a particular subject, like a person or an object, then you can either place the object and move it and turn it and whatever. You can manipulate it. And at the same time, if you're photographing a person, one of the key aspects that you need to learn is how to direct your model. So in a situation where you have control of the lighting and the subject, I think gear doesn't matter as much. Now we go to the other corner, we go to the other side. When does gear matter? When does better gear matter? And coming off of the last thing we talked about, we can definitely say that gear matters, that more advanced gear matters when there is a high level of uncontrollability, a high level of unpredictability. Case in point, I think that if there are any sports photographers watching this video, you would agree when I say that you can do sports photography with any camera, but it is going to be harder if your gear is not properly equipped. What does that mean? Obviously, when we're talking about sports photography, there's a lot of fast movements, and that is going to be affected by the frame rate, that is going to be affected by the shutter speed, and that is also going to be greatly affected by the focusing. And those three things are actually precisely the reasons why sports photography usually, at least in the professional sense, requires a high-end camera, such as the A9 series from Sony. The current version is more than double or maybe even triple the price of an entry-level full-frame camera. So that alone speaks about the necessity of it. Now, it doesn't mean that if you want to start doing sports photography, then you automatically need to buy that level of expensive gear. No. You can, of course, start with something a little bit more basic, but you can also expect that there will be a little bit more difficulty in that. Now, someone might say that if you need to rely on higher end gear to be able to do sports photography, then that must mean you're not as good as the others who don't have that expensive gear. No. I think it should be established that if you're doing photography professionally, you want to be able to get as much assurance as possible that you don't miss a fleeting moment, that you don't miss a crucial shot. And I think sports photography is one of the best examples of that. If you're doing photography professionally, then missing a shot might also mean ruining an entire shoot. Missing a shot might be make or break. It might be do or die. At the same time, another context that requires better gear, more advanced gear, is the extremes of environment. Of course, no matter how much we say that you can do photography with any camera, there are cameras that will not survive extreme cold or extreme heat. Now, more importantly, the extremes of environment can also mean light. And one of the reasons why you might need more advanced gear, one of the reasons why it may be more crucial to have a better camera is when you have to shoot in low light. And again, it's not something that you can control. This also applies to lenses. For one, if it's a low light situation, then obviously there are better chances of getting better images with faster lenses with bigger aperture. At the same time, the extremes of the environment can actually be the space. For me, for example, I shoot a lot of interiors, and one of the hardest things to do is shoot a really, really tight space. And of course, this is where relatively more expensive wide-angle lenses come in. In contrast, if your subject is way too far, then this is where telephoto lenses come in, and of course, they are relatively more expensive than your standard zooms and your kit lenses. Now, lastly, when does gear matter a lot? In the professional setting, when there are technical requirements. If you're shooting professionally for a client, the first question is a yes or no question. Are they hiring you or not? And sometimes, no matter how unreasonable the requirements your clients give, it's still up to them if you can deliver what they want. They might not need a 100 megapixel family portrait, but if that's what they want and that's what they want to pay for, then ultimately the answer is no to you. That on its own is a technical requirement, and no matter how long you debate that they don't need a 100 megapixel family photo, if that's what they want, that's what they will pay for. Now, more realistically, in commercial work, there are clients and there are projects that will require at least 50 megapixels or something like that. There are even clients that will be very specific with the brand of the camera they want to be used because, for example, they want the colors to be a certain way. Again, the end of that conversation is a yes or no question whether you have what they want and if they are willing to pay for it. And believe me, this conversation can go on, and I think that's a good thing if we keep talking about it. So definitely, if you have more to add, then you can leave them down below in the comments. However, to conclude this conversation, I think there are two things that we have to say. Number one is that both sides of this conversation will be valid in different contexts. I've said that already, and I just feel like I need to say that again, because this should never end with a disagreement. It should be an ending where we all agree to disagree because we all have different ways of doing photography and we all have different reasons for holding a camera. And the second thing is, and I think this is something very important for the younger photographers to be hearing about, is that if you don't know yet what gear you need, then it probably doesn't matter to you yet if you have a better camera or not. At the end of the day, no matter how many YouTube videos you watch about what's the best camera in 2024, what's the best lens for landscape photography, what's the best lens for sports, blah, blah, blah. No matter how much time you spend consuming content about that, no matter how many articles you read, you will only know what you need and what you prefer, which is actually very important because, again, photography is an art and you need to have your own artistic vision. For you to be able to know what you need and what you want, you need experience. And that's the best thing about knowledge in photography and the best thing about experience in photography. You don't really need to buy something to get experience. You can go out with just your smartphone, practice your composition, and I'm pretty sure if you're at that level, you're going to learn something by learning from your own mistakes. You can ask other people to provide a critique for your work, and even if you get the harshest comments, there might be something good that you can get out of it. You're not looking for validation, you're looking for pearls to learn from. Now, if you're looking to venture into a more specialized kind of photography, whether you want to go into portraiture, you want to go into fashion, you want to do landscapes, you want to do architecture, you want to do macro, you want to do videography. If you don't know yet what kind of gear you need and you don't have a lot of money to spend, then before you look for something to buy, look for someone to learn from. And if you're lucky, that someone you can learn from can also be someone you can borrow from. More specifically, that someone can be someone you can gain experience from. And after that, you can find out and you will know what exactly it is you need and whether or not the gear will matter in the kind of photography that you want to do. So does gear matter? Well, it totally depends.